Hello. For this learning teaching interaction, I'm going to start off with Chapter 3. Chapter 3 discussed principles of program evaluation. So this chapter talked about developing a vision and how each person has their own vision. And I really liked the point that was made that diversity can enrich the work. So when you're working with a group of people, it'll be very difficult to come up with a single statement that everyone agrees on 100%. And I found this to be true when I've been working with groups and classes at BYU Idaho. And I've just found that sometimes it's frustrating when everyone doesn't agree, but it is also helpful when each person brings unique ideas, because I think that adds a wonderful aspect to the group dynamic. And then a couple of points I found especially helpful with evaluation were, one was to rephrase program objectives to create evaluation questions. And I just thought this was a really simple tip because it makes it a lot easier to come up with questions. And I used that when I was creating questions for our evaluation. Another thing I liked was don't expect to be able to do comprehensive evaluation with a developing program. And I was a little relieved to read this in the textbook because I was pretty overwhelmed about coming up with an assessment instrument, but that just made me feel a little bit better to know that the expectations aren't as high if it's still a developing program. Moving on to Appendix E, which was about ethics and family life education. There were two personal connections I wanted to share in regards to the Family Life Educators Code of Ethics. First, the preamble mentioned that family life education seeks to provide knowledge and skills for effective living and to enable people to develop into healthy adults and realize their potential. So these phrases reminded me of how the gospel works. We're provided with knowledge and skills, and those can come from the scriptures, church lessons, or from our leaders. And then we use our agency in those skills and knowledge to reach our potential. So as family life educators, we can't force people to make changes, and we can't make those changes for them. So we just need to give them the appropriate knowledge and skills. Another connection I made was when I was reading about relationships with children and youth. Number 1 in this category states, I will treat children and youth with respect and sensitivity to their needs and rights as developing persons. Now, I worked as a nanny last year, and I had to constantly remind myself that the children were developing physically, emotionally, and mentally, and so I had to be sensitive to those needs. And I think it's especially hard when children are getting a little bit older because they might seem like adults at times, but we just can't treat children the same way that we treat adults. Next, I wanted to talk about Palm's article on professional ethics and practice. Palm mentioned that society will hold family life educators more accountable as they become more involved with families. So I thought of the way in which some of my friends and acquaintances hold me accountable to uphold my morals and values as an LDS person. So my friends used to say things like, Emily won't do that, she's a Mormon. And so that connection I made just reminded me that people are aware of our actions, and we need to be careful that we don't ruin the reputation of family life educators through careless behavior. Palm also discussed mandatory versus aspiration ethics. So while mandatory ethics complies with the law and with the code of ethics, aspiration ethics goes above and beyond and strives to follow a set of ideal standards. So I think it's a good goal for us to strive towards aspiration ethics. And I also thought about how I set higher standards for myself in my education. So we have a minimum requirement that we have to meet to pass classes, but I try to put forth my best effort and learn as much as possible. I think I get more out of my education by doing this. Finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the articles from Doherty and Myers-Walls. One point Doherty made is that when the boundaries of family life education are crossed, the educator tends to become anxious and feel incompetent. And I experienced this when Jenny and I were conducting our first intake interview with our participant. And she wanted us to help her improve the physical intimacy in her marriage. And it was clear that it would be a very personal subject. So I felt completely unqualified, and I was definitely feeling anxious. So I can kind of have a personal witness of how you can be affected if you step outside the boundaries of family life education. I felt much more comfortable advising our participant to seek help from a family therapist. I'll admit that I didn't have too many concerns with Doherty's original model as I was reading through it the first time, but then I basically agreed with everything in Myers-Wall's article. So one concern she mentioned with Doherty's model was the hierarchical relationship. So the levels of the model imply that therapists can do everything both at the lower levels and at the higher levels. And I agreed with the point that Myers-Wall's made that not all therapists are trained to provide family life education. I think they're two very different things, and we can't just assume that family therapists can do it all. And so one personal connection I made here is that most people assume I want to be a family therapist when I tell them that I'm studying marriage and families. However, I think I might actually prefer to be a family life educator, and I think that family life education is just as important as family therapy. And the last point I wanted to focus on is the overlapping roles of family life education, family therapy, and family case management. Myers-Wall's article had a figure that showed that the goal of all three roles is to build strong, healthy families. So family life education, family therapy, and family case management do have their differences, but they help to accomplish the same goal. So I was reminded of all the meetings, activities, and programs that we have in our church. We attend sacrament meetings, Sunday school, and Relief Society on Sundays. And then we also go visiting teaching, and we have programs for the youth, etc. So all these things are important, and all of them help us accomplish the same goal, which is to develop our testimonies. So I just thought it was kind of neat to see a connection there between families and the gospel. So those are all the highlights that I wanted to share with you. Thanks for watching, and thank you in advance for your feedback.